Hey folks, it's Pastor Rick, your Utah wine pastor. And today, June 25th, I guess, I've got a wine update for you. And I think you could just file this one under old friends and new discoveries. Bonnie and I just recently returned from a week-long trip to California, part of the wine country that included 2 days in Lodi. Now, we've both done a lot of tasting in California in the past, especially during those 14 years that we lived in the Bay Area. But somehow or other, we never got to Lodi, even though we were both fans of big red wines. So here we are in Utah, 20 years later. We're looking forward to this trip. And I would just say, as a new discovery, Lodi didn't disappoint. The trip got off to a really nice start with our room in a beautiful old house converted into an Airbnb. It was called kind of cheesy Grape Escapes, but it was in this really neat upscale neighborhood. Trees were huge in that area, and the surrounding properties obviously very well cared for. So it was just this excellent location. Actually very close to a really nice, cute old downtown area, and short drives really to some of the very best wineries in the region. So I guess the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the Michael David Winery. Going back decades, and I mean decades, the very first wine I ever had from Lodi was the Michael David 7 Deadly Zins. Somehow I think that's appropriate for the Utah wine pastor to have something called 7 Deadly Zins, right? Well, both Bonnie and I love that wine. And truth be told, we drank a lot of it over the years. Sadly, however, Michael David sold this brand to a large conglomerate back in 2018. And I've had it since then. And I'm afraid to have to tell you, it just isn't what I always enjoyed. And I would say the wine was okay, but it did have that mass-produced aspect to it and just seemed to lack the character that I'd come to know. Well, be that as it may, we still wanted to taste it, Michael David, and we made that winery our first stop. And it turns out it is a huge operation in terms of their production. They make over 750,000 cases. That's about 9 million bottles of wine every year. And on site, they have a gift shop, they have a tasting room, restaurant, and it was pretty busy while we were there. And so when we finally got around to tasting, the staff was knowledgeable. We tasted 6 different wines from several brands that they now offer. And I would tell you that well-known Michael David sense of humor was on display right from the very beginning. The first on the list of our tastings was the Freak Show Chardonnay. And I would tell you that this came as a bit of a surprise to me because I don't ever recall seeing it offered here in Utah. But to be honest, I probably haven't looked that hard for California Chardonnay lately. So tasting this one was I'll tell you, was a very pleasant surprise. It was aged 50% in new oak and 50% in stainless steel, so it had some complexity without being too oaky. And I would tell you that it had good fruit, nice acidity, and at $18 a bottle, I'd say it's a good value. And it turns out, I checked it out, that although it's not available in the Tooele wine store, where I am, it is available in the big wine store on 3rd West. And I guess I'd also say that I would happily drink this wine again and may even buy a couple of bottles next time I'm in Salt Lake City. I'd give it 84, 85 points out of 100. I thought it was a good wine and a good value. Now, time and space and my feeble memory really won't permit me to give you notes on the other 5 wines that we tasted. Although I would tell you that they were all quite nice, if not exceptional. But honestly, I left the Michael David Winery feeling just a little bit uneasy. I mentioned I'd loved their seven Deadly Zins back in the day, and all the wines that we tasted on this trip were, as I said, nice, but not exceptional. And I guess what I'm afraid of is that this winery now seems to be more into marketing and making uh, statements about their winery site. They're more into marketing and glitz, maybe, than making good value wines. And I say that kind of sadly and reluctantly. They have several different brands right now today, including Freak Show, Earthquake. They have one called Misfits and Mavens, another one called Inkblot. And finally, at the end of all of this, they have a higher end Michael David bottling. But even at the winery, it seemed like the staff was more interested in what was going on with the different brands and how cute they were. And they were more interested in what's going on inside the building instead of what was going on inside the bottle. Now, I hope I'm wrong about the overall direction of this icon of Lodi. They were one of the first ones there, but time will tell. In the meantime, I'll continue to try different Freak Show and Earthquake offerings. Those seem to be the most affordable. And I have no reason to expect otherwise than that they would be well made and decent values. I would be interested, however, to hear about your thoughts on any Michael David wines that you've tasted recently. And you can email me at info@utahwinepastor.com, whether you've had Seven Deadly Zins recently from the big conglomerate that bought it or any of the other Michael David wines. I'd really be interested in how they suited your palate and what your impression of them has been of late. So don't be afraid to email me at info@utahwinepastor.com. I look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'll just say cheers and amen. And we've got lots of other postings that we're going to be doing about this trip to Lodi. We found a couple of really brand new wines and wineries to us in Lodi. And then maybe the really neat thing after that was spending some time with a dear friend in and around the Russian River Dry Creek area where we tasted some phenomenal wines. And I'll do a separate podcast for those. So again, cheers and amen. Looking forward to talking to you soon.